morning. Hi, I'm Ripesh Patel. I'm the Commercial and Procurement Strategy Director at Network Rail. I've got a broad portfolio that I'm responsible for, but one of the key aspects of it is our people strategy and everything that's kind of ED&I related.
Hello, I'm Ashleigh Norris-Seal. I am the EDI partner at Balfour VINCI area north on HS2.
And I'm Natalie Jones, so I'm Head of Talent at National Highways.
Hi, just Teresa. I'm Christina, I work at DGC, and I'm the Social Impact Manager, so I look after all things social impact and ED&I.
Brilliant, thank you. And just looking at Shelley, Caton, I'm the Director for D&I at VINCI UK&I Ireland. So, panel. First question for you is, what innovative approaches have you seen or implemented to attract a more diverse talent pool? And have these actually improved the recruitment outcomes? Big one for you. Ripesh, do you want to take that on?
Yeah, sure. So, probably last 18 months or so, we've recruited about 40-ish people within our commercial and procurement team. And we changed what we've typically done in this space. So, what we've normally done, we would have just sent out our job spec. It would have been on networkrail.co.uk. It would have probably been advertised in Railway Weekly, which all of 7 people read, and then we would have wondered why only, we got a certain demographic or a low volume of applicants. So we changed things around. So we started to look at everything from what our job descriptions look like, and we couldn't change those because we're unionised. So we played around with the job advert then, and we brought the job to life in the advert by answering a couple of questions like, who would this role appeal to? What kind of skills? If you've got these skills, go for this role. And we tried to provide as much energy, I suppose, and passion around what the role could be as possible. We then looked at how we would advertise and market that role. So again, avoiding things, not avoiding maybe, but not advertising in just 1 or 2 publications, but looking at where else we can start to attract a more diverse pool of people to see that. We also developed something called a candidate pack. And in that candidate pack, we didn't really go into too much detail about the role, but more about our culture, more about how important ED&I was, for example, the employee networks, what training and development opportunities that people will have, and all of the great things that people look for in a role over and above just the kind of day job aspect of it. We also developed some videos to accompany that candidate pack. And that landed really well from what we can gather from the people who joined, because it brought to life again what it's like to work for Network Rail, over and above, you are a procurement manager and you'll be buying stuff basically. We then went through an anonymised CV process. We made sure that every single applicant was put forward on their merit and assessed against their skills and capabilities, and we made sure we had diverse interview panels as well for each of the roles. So we put a lot of thought into how we can start to attract and convert, I suppose, the diversity that was applying into actual positions. And what we get is, it's difficult to tell from the numbers because our internal data is not hugely accurate, which is slightly disappointing. But when I look around the function and look at the hires that we've made, it has made a huge impact in that space.
So, just a bit of context. So, when I first started at BBC, almost 4 years ago now, I was in the recruitment team. And as you can imagine, flashback 4 years ago, it was the brink of COVID, a lot of people were working from home and a lot of projects had been put on hold. And I have to say we were in a very good position where we had our pick of candidates, essentially. So the attitude that we probably had towards recruitment 4 years ago had to change drastically. We had to kind of have a bit of a breakdown with line managers about, actually, you're just kind of picking people based off who you know, what companies they work for, but actually that's not going to be sustainable. So similar to what Ripesh was saying, we kind of had to have a look at, what is it that we're putting out there? What are people seeing? Is it good? If I read that, would I apply for the job? So we made significant changes in our job descriptions. We reduced the amount of information we were putting in there because it can get quite overwhelming. And we really had to make sure that our job descriptions weren't maybe accidentally disadvantaging people also. Things like, which you still see today in some job descriptions, like we need you to have 5 years of experience in this exact profession doing this role to be successful. And we know that's not necessarily the case. So it was removing things that could be discrimination towards age in that respect. There were roles that were advertised for, like an office manager based at a really local compound, that we were saying that you must have a full UK driving licence for. And it was like, hold on a minute, how many people are we potentially rejecting based on such a minute piece of criteria that actually isn't essential for the roles? Off the back of that, it was really important for us to make sure that this was sort of communicated alongside, within the hiring managers as well. So we developed inclusive hiring training to make sure that people were making sure that they were looking at CVs and applications, and they weren't just picking out, you know, oh, they don't have the nice house, essentially. Or we're picking people that have got the essential requirements, and we're making sure that we're not kind of basing decisions off unconscious biases we might have. So we developed a CV sifting matrix, which has been proven really useful. So that is a matrix whereby the line manager or the hiring manager and the recruiter, they would have a conversation at the very beginning of the hiring process. They would decide exactly what criteria needed to be on there. Essentially, if the candidate didn't have this, they wouldn't be able to do the job, which meant that we had so many more applications coming through because we changed the job descriptions, and then we were having so many more people being converted from application to shortlist to interview stage because we weren't focusing on things that didn't really matter as to whether they had it or didn't have it. So that made a massive difference. Again, that inclusive hiring training, really important to support the managers in effective interviewing as well, because asking 10 technical questions to a candidate when actually there could be so much more about, you know, the transferable skills, their behaviours as well. And we really wanted to create a culture where we're hiring people who value people. I'm not going to go too much into that because I think that leads into sort of maybe what we'll discuss shortly. But yeah, training the recruitment team as well was really important on our ED&I processes, and again, making sure they were on the same page as the hiring managers as well.
So I think really similar story is probably going to come out in that continuous improvement journey. So again, thinking about the adverts, we equally can't change our job descriptions, but absolutely what's in the adverts, you know, putting them through things like the gender decoders to making sure that there's that inclusive language there. Really just thinking about how you embed those inclusive practices all the way through recruitment. So how are you perceived and coming across through your EVP? You know, on your career site, do you look inclusive? You know, is that inclusive language? What programs, accreditations, etc. have you got that shows applicants that actually you are an inclusive organisation? Equally, we've had kind of interview skills training that's been in for several years, but we've been refreshing that, making sure it's up to date, that managers are expected to go through it. Probably one a little step further with our early talent population, so we do check at every stage of that recruitment process if there are any biases within the assessments that they're taking at any one time, and then looking at the numbers and making sure that it's reflective of what you'd expect to see through each stage of the applications. But equally then, and I won't go into too much detail on it, but just thinking about what you're portraying externally needs to be what is felt internally at the same time. So just making sure that it's reflective across the whole employee life cycle from application to that hire to retire piece.
So yeah, as I mentioned, we work in recruitment, and we have at any one time about 2,000 people out on the site, so we recruit for trades and labour up to professional, technical, managerial roles. And our recruitment process for our site-based workforce versus the 100 back office staff that are supporting is obviously vastly different. Local employment is very much at the heart of what we do, and what our workforce looks like in Birmingham versus Cumbria is going to be vastly different. And the diversity of those workforces are going to be vastly different. But for us, it's really about the economic empowerment of the local communities that our workforce are based in. And And then once we have established that, we then work with our clients to create targeted recruitment programs that benefit that local community in the areas that the councils have identified that they need it most, whether that be an ex-offender programme, a women into construction programme, a pre-employment programme, and then make sure that those are using local training providers with local residents as much as possible. And then also the industry shifted a lot in terms of the fact that what a recruiter looks like, and a lot of our longer serving recruiters have come from site, and that was traditionally how recruitment and resourcing were done, particularly for those trades and labour-based roles. And we've seen like a big shift in what recruiters look like, so it's kind of training those behaviours, which I know you've touched on. So we work with the Supply Chain Sustainability School to create a bespoke pathway that actually all of our new starters in the office undertake, but in particular the recruiters, so that's inclusive attraction recruitment modules, but then I will supplement that with bespoke PGC EDI training, so things like when I did unconscious bias training, I used stats from within our own workforce so that there's a sense of ownership there and a sense of buy-in there from our recruiters. I do an internal diversity report annually, which I benchmark against this, and identify the gaps and present that back to the recruiters so that they can see. And I think it's a case where, whilst I manage EDI doesn't sit with me, it sits everywhere. It sits on the board, it sits within the recruitment, and it sits within every business function. And I think that's really been the key to that diverse recruitment piece.
Oh, sorry. I'm very jealous. I don't have a microphone, so it's why I'm so quiet. So I think what I'm hearing, anyways, it's probably less about innovation and what we're doing more innovatively, and actually more about more conscious decisions around recruitment. So with that in mind, I think you've all implied that actually culture's really, really key to this, whether that's our internal culture within our hiring managers or whether that's how we appear to the market externally. So my next question to you is, what role does culture play in retaining, in this instance, diverse talent? And what strategies can organisations use to create an environment where all employees feel supported and valued? Natalie, do you want to jump on this one first?
Yeah, thank you. So I think culture is really important because I think, as I touched upon before, is what you see as an applicant and how you're portraying yourselves as an organisation should be how your employees feel as well. So there shouldn't be any shocks when somebody comes into an organisation of, you sold me the dream and actually it's something completely different. I think employee networks have got a really big part to play in that, in making it feel like there are people that that are like you in that organisation, and can really help you as well if you work with those networks to think about how you can make change within the organisation, how you can make it inclusive. So I definitely think that that's a real key thing to work alongside. Equally is not doing to people, so not making presumptions about what somebody wants based upon what diverse group they may or may not come from. So something that my team are working on at the moment is we're looking from a talent perspective how we can support some of our diverse groups to go for new roles and have that confidence, etc., and have the right development. But the stance that we've taken from it is running focus groups. So we've got some data that backs it up from various sources, but we want to hear from the people. So really having that people-centric, focused approach to not making presumptions and listening to what your employees, what your diverse groups want. And I think that helps them to start to build up that culture in the organisation, that you're a listening organisation. So I think that's kind of the important things for me.
Ashleigh, what about you in terms of culture?
I think it is one of the most important things to keep people, and I love what you said about what they see externally needs to be represented internally. And I think it's been mentioned quite a lot today that we're doing a really great job in trying to bring a more diverse workforce on board, but then how are we supporting people when they actually get there? How are we encouraging people to stay? I think it comes down to, do people feel safe psychologically? Are people safe? Do they feel empowered to speak up? Do they feel empowered to raise issues, raise concerns? There was questions around accessibility earlier, and how that people feel that, you know, if there's something that needs to be brought to somebody's attention, what are the reactions that are going to be if someone does that? So I think that psychological safety is so important. And I think you made a good point as well, Natalie, around feedback. I think we're very quick to kind of give feedback to people, let's say about performance, for example. You're not doing what you're supposed to do, let's figure out how we can get you up to standard. But actually, in leadership roles or as an organisation, are we asking for feedback? And if we are and we're getting it, what are we doing with it? How are we actioning it? How are we showing our people that they are heard, we understand and we want to do better? And I think in training, skills and behavioural development as well, not everybody is going to be on the same page. We're very fortunate to be in a room full of people today that are very like-minded and want to do better and want to improve. And it's kind of getting that engagement with every single person that already exists on the project. Again, how can we be more inclusive? What is it about your workplace that you like at the moment? What's the magic? What's the baggage? What can we do better? So yeah, I think training, skill development, feedback, action in it, and creating a speak-up culture is really important.
And just on that, you just mentioned about making sure we have that inclusive site culture as well. One of the questions that's come in is, are there any tips for instilling an inclusive site culture so that we can retain effectively?
Potentially. I would say I'm still learning about that, and I think again it comes back down to asking the questions. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I went to the conference last week, and they said about speaking the language of the person you're speaking to. Every person on the project is different, or every person in the workforce is different, and it's about making sure that we're making adjustments based on what the needs of that person is. There might be disparities based on how office staff feel versus how on-site people feel, but until we ask the question, we don't know and we can't see what the gaps are.
Yeah, I think just following on from that, I do think that obviously we're in a great position where we have both an office and a site culture within one organisation, and I do feel that there is a gap between the things that we are talking about and implementing in our offices and what we are talking about and implementing on site. And I think to tie the two questions together, actually, data is incredibly important, diversity data is incredibly important, but actually if you are recruiting people that identify with protected characteristics and then getting on site and facing discrimination, then you're doing a really big injustice to the individual and to the industry. And I always think that there needs to be an approach where we work backwards and get the inclusivity on site correct and the diversity will organically follow. I think that a lot of, if you took something like psychological safety, it's really at the forefront of what everyone is talking about with really good reason, but maybe not translating on site, in my experience, as much as it could be. And I think there's really great programs. We're really lucky that we work with like very values-aligned clients, as we see in the room, that are looking at really good programs. So things like we adapted the banter versus bullying toolbox talk, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen. That is essentially psychological safety translated into a more site-friendly language. And we also identified a soft skills gap with our supervisors on site, not our supervisors, the supervisors on site, including us. And we ran a pilot programme actually on the SES section of HS2, whereby we put them through soft skills training, behavioural training, whatever you want to call it, and asked their direct reports before and after, like a series of questions, and saw a noticeable improvement in their managerial skills. And then that's not just inclusion, that's modern slavery, that's mental health, that's occupational health and safety that you're addressing when you get the inclusion piece and the culture piece correct on the side. Oh, sorry.
Does anyone else have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, culture is not something you can touch, but you'll feel it. So it's about attitudes, it's about behaviours, values, and and the environment you create. So if you talk about diversity and inclusion all the time, then that becomes part of your culture. So on sites and everywhere else, it's about how you embed that across what you do and how you do things. So it's not viewed as a bolt-on or a tag-on, but it is actually part of the fabric of your makeup as that organisation, as people who work for that company. So a good way to try and achieve that, I suppose, is to try and embed that into many ways as possible throughout your organisation.
Great, thank you. And I think what we're seeing from all the data says that, you know, diverse talent still isn't getting through our recruitment pipeline. And someone's got a question in here, a little bit challenging one, so we'll help each other out on this one, but I think it's really important actually, is how ethical is it to keep attracting and recruiting women and ethnic minorities into our industry when the culture is a huge challenge and they then leave us?
No, this is just something that I'm incredibly passionate about. It's one of the first things that I identified relatively new to the industry. And what I noticed is that, yeah, we're putting so much, but you can see in the data, like the data is so good in that it shows that the attraction actually, if you took women as an example, the attraction is not necessarily the issue. There might be a bit of a bottleneck in the shortlisting and interview process, but if you look at site-based roles, on the whole, that's not really how they're recruited for anyway. So let's say that the attraction is the issue. You get women on site. I don't think the site culture is where it needs to be, where, for example, could I go to a school and look at an 18-year-old woman in the eye and say, yeah, you will not face sexism when you go on site? I would like to say yes, and I'm sure that is the case on a lot of sides, so this is all but doom and gloom, but I do think that we need to be honest with ourselves about this. And then you also look at the leaver data and the age in which they're leaving, and I would never want to prescribe a reason, but say, for example, a proportion of women left to have children, and then they return. We are an industry that work on very tight margins, so something like a timeshare shift, return to work type of setup on site is not the most commercially viable approach. It's not cheap to just recruit someone, but it's a way that you can introduce women back into the industry after they have kids. But it's not something, I think it's something that costs in the short term and has benefits in the long term. And I think a lot of and that applies to so many, I've picked women as an example there, but it applies to so many inclusion-based initiatives. They are costly to start with. It causes an industry shift to then retain more people in the industry, that it would be a great return on investment.
So I think I'd just add to that is that if you don't try to change things, nothing will ever change, and we will continue to sit here and have the same conversation year after year unless you chip away at it. And unfortunately, you may sometimes feel like chipping away at it, but as long as you've got people who are willing to do that, then I think that it's something that's definitely worthwhile. So I was at a local college last week, and I was in their construction element, and said to the vice principal, "Are there any women on this?" There was one. There was one in the whole room, which was really, it was disappointing. And they were saying to me, we go out to schools and we try and encourage females within schools to think about kind of the industry, etc. But it's just really tough, and they just don't. They don't want to take it up. And that's kind of where some of the systemic issues probably start, because there's a little bit of you can't necessarily change what's already there. If we've not invested in young people and shown them a different way, and they are the people who will be the inclusive people, etc. of the future. So for me, it's about starting early, thinking about how that change is going to come up over the years, and not giving up.
And if you think about the discussions that we're having here today, that we're having in our organisations, they didn't exist 5-6 years ago. So that's progress in itself, for the fact we're doing that. The data that we're collecting didn't exist a few years back. No one was collecting information like this. And we're now seeing it in this format and this structure. So it can sometimes feel disheartening that we've not moved the needle as much as we probably should or could have, but we have moved it, I think, and I think we should consider how much more we can do in this space to move it even further, because I think progress has been made, probably not at the pace that we would like, but I think over the last 5-6 years that there's been a momentum there. I suppose I'm coming from a place of let's keep that momentum going. Like if I look at my personal life, the conversation I was having with my 18-year-old, some of the conversations about race are very similar to what my parents had with me kind of 30-odd years ago, and it's disappointing sometimes in that space. But then I talk to her friends and understand that they're far more inclusive than I ever was at that age. And so the younger generation coming through are going to challenge us, and they're going to push us, and I think we'll begin to see another step change happen. But it takes time, and I'm hoping that we get there.
Great, sorry. Stuck on the questions there. So just in terms of, how we've shifted, so, I remember the days you go to an interview and the interviewer would make it as hard as possible. Tell me your favourite joke. So how can we shift that hiring process, make it easier for people, try and remove that power imbalance between the interviewee and the interviewer?
So talking from sort of experience when dealing with both the recruiters and the hiring managers, I think it's reminding people that it's a two-way thing as well. If we're looking at that power imbalance, ultimately those who are interviewing for a role are still sussing out whether it's the right thing for them, if it's the right culture, if it's the right role, the responsibilities that they've got, does that suit their experience and what they want to be doing, and also humbling hiring managers as well, reminding them of that. And that's one of the biggest things that I push during the inclusive hiring training is we can't be asking ridiculously hard questions. Yes, we're going to have to ask technical questions. You might have a role that does require some level of technical knowledge. But if you're talking to an apprentice, for example, or someone who's looking for an apprenticeship and they've just come out of college and they're 16 years old and you're throwing these questions at them, how is that going to help them to be successful? How is that going to help them to develop? I think as well, making sure that we're training hiring managers on unconscious bias, which I have been doing as well. There are so many biases that crop up during the hiring process as well. We've got affinity bias being one of them. Do they like the same thing as me? Do they challenge me? Or are they just agreeable? So again, reminding people that diversity of thought is so important, and when diverse groups come together to come to a solution, that's when the magic happens. So don't be afraid and don't be put off by people who are different to you and think differently and do challenge you.
Lovely, thanks. And just picking up on unconscious bias, because someone's asked a question about that. So data presentations earlier in the year also showed that unconscious bias training had little impact. So what else do you think we could do?
Ooh. Interesting.
No, only because I did unconscious bias training and then silly afterwards looked, and there are a lot of studies to show if you wanted to look into like the Starbucks case study, actually had a negative impact. And I think when I delivered it, the first thing I said is like, this is not a get out of jail free card. You just be like, oh, it's unconscious. That's not how that works. But I could say when I delivered it, I think I mentioned before, like I tied it into our own workforce data and said like, have a look and see if you think that these are your biases. But I also think like we created like a holistic program of training. So things like psychological safety, which I know like so many people are doing. We've done intersectionality, we've done, so basically just looking more holistically at culture as a whole. And as I say, like I am a strong believer that if you can get the inclusion piece right, the diversity follows naturally. And so creating that really inclusive culture, I think in turn then alleviates some of that bias.
I think, just to add, I think there's something there about finding your role models as well within your organisation. I'm sure there are lots of them, and then telling the stories. I think stories, and you just mentioned they're kind of external case studies, but I think internal stories as well can be really powerful. So find those places where it's being done well, where you've got those role models, and I think that can really help as well to show what can be done in that positive environment and encourage others to follow suit.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, just off the back of that as well, I really 100% agree with that, and I think it brings it home and it humanises it for people as well when they see their colleagues talking about race or religion or discrimination that they face and thinking, oh, actually, I know that person and I didn't realise that they have gone through that, and that must mean other people are experiencing it too. What can I do to be better? We're doing a series around neurodiversity at the moment, and part of the webinars we're having people who want to talk about their personal experiences with having a neurodiverse condition, and you wouldn't believe the level of engagement that we're getting, and managers coming to us after going, oh, there's somebody in my team who's told me they've got ADHD. What can I do to support? How can I be better? So it's just simple changes like that, and getting people involved and talking about it that I think humanises it, but also starts by, I think people maybe struggle with wanting to ask the question. Like, being curious can sometimes be uncomfortable. So if people are talking about it, it opens up that space.
Absolutely. I posted a blog on my discovery of ADHD for International Day of Disabilities. It was amazing, the internal and external response that I got. People want to hear these stories and they really, really relate to them. Ripesh, you've been a little bit popular here, so I've got a couple just for you. How do you help your suppliers to be more diverse in their recruitment? And people also want to know how successful your blind CV sifting has been.
I thought it was going to be just think a karaoke number.
You've got to jump
on. Okay, so if I take the first one first. So how do we embed this across our supply chain? So we've got a supply chain of 4,100-ish suppliers, of which about 3,000 are SMEs. And what we've kicked off recently, and Tom in my team sits in there, is a program called the Inclusive Procurement Program. So as part of the Inclusive Procurement Program is to make procurement as inclusive and accessible to as wide a body of suppliers as possible, but also to start to align with suppliers from an ED&I perspective because of the impact that it can have. So we are interested in helping, shaping and supporting our supply chain with everything ED&I related, from recruitment practices to training to development to all kinds of stuff that can help, again, move the needle on ED&I. So we've kicked that off. It's in reasonably early stages at the moment. We're working with the supply chain stall actually, and as part of the FIR programme, to see if we can do this across national highways and HS2 and TfL as well, because we're all dealing with very similar supply chains. So that was the first question. The second one was what the impact.
Yeah.
It's had a pretty big impact. There's an argument that says all you're doing is kicking the unconscious bias can a little bit further down the road with that, and it's true to an extent, but we've had, monitoring it, we've had lots of diverse applicants apply. We've had then lots more continue into that recruitment process, into the interview stage, and that's where we have our first drop-off typically. But now we've noticed that the percentage numbers have increased, but we haven't yet still translated that into offers being made, probably to the same degree that we should have. And our numbers reflect what we've got here that we've seen today. So we do get about 60% of our applicants being from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, and about 25% that are female. In commercial procurement, we're getting about 50% that are female in that space. So I suppose the short answer is yes, it has worked, but there's still a bit more work to be done in this space.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we're out of time, panel. That flew by, didn't it? But so just thank you for all your questions. There are so many questions here. I wish we could answer them all, but thank you to the panel.